All right, folks, welcome to this series of video lessons on civil liberties. I'm Miss Jennifer Blank, and I will be your guide on this journey. So I want to draw your attention before I start in on the content to this quote down at the bottom right from Benjamin Franklin. Any society that will give up a little liberty to gain a little security will deserve neither and lose both. There are other versions of this quote out there that any society that will give up liberty for security will gain neither liberty nor security, right? There's a little, but the sentiment is definitely valid, and I want you to keep this in mind. 100% security is impossible. Just want that to hang there a minute. We will never be 100% secure. With that in mind, we need to be cognizant of the fact that attempts at 100% security in exchange for essential liberties will never work. I want you to keep this in mind as we go through this. It is very easy for public officials to terrorize the public into thinking that in order to be safe, you must not have certain liberties. We must be willing to remove said liberties in an effort to maintain safety and security. Be wary. I don't care who it's coming from. I don't care what side of the ideological perspective it's coming from. Be wary. If someone says that to you, stop, think, assess. Now, there are times in crisis when certain things do need to be suspended temporarily. And we'll talk about those things, but I really want you to focus as we're going through these series of lessons on civil liberties. I want you to be mindful of the fact that freedom is fragile, and it's one of the first things to go when people get scared. Fear destroys liberty. Okay, so just keep that in mind. So with that being said, all right, these are some things we're going to be talking about over the series of 3 video lessons. So we are going to talk about what civil liberties are and how they differ from civil rights. Civil rights and civil liberties are not the same thing. And we just, at least if you're in my class, we just had a whole series of civil rights video lessons, and now we're on the civil liberties portion. But I'm going to review that again because the distinction is important. Okay, we're going to talk about the First Amendment. We're going to talk about prior restraint. We're going to look at the 14th Amendment again. We're going to look at incorporation theory. All right, we're going to take a look at this thing called the clear and present danger rule. We're going to look at hate speech. We're going to look at symbolic speech, libel, and slander. And those are 2 Supreme Court cases we're going to take a closer look at, New York Times v. United States and Tinker v. Des Moines. So let's get started. So, okay, what are civil liberties? Civil liberties are personal freedoms the government can't infringe upon. These are what we would also refer to them as natural rights. We get them because we exist, because we are human. Freedom from and freedom of religion, freedom from and of. See, this is what drives me crazy. The religious liberty advocates are running around saying, freedom of. And you're right, you do get that. But people also have freedom from religion. And we're going to take a closer look at that too. Those people who are like, oh, we must have freedom from. They also forget that everybody has freedom of religion. The most extreme sides of this debate forget the other thing that doesn't coincide with their worldview. They like to delete the other one, right? And I want you to know that there's 2. There's freedom from and freedom of. We got free speech. We got freedom of press. We're secure from unlawful searches and, generally speaking, from oppressive government. Now, when a government is oppressive versus when it's not oppressive, that can be subject to the eye of the beholder, and we'll explore that also. But the key thing that we need to keep in mind with civil liberties, keep in mind, is that we must balance personal freedoms with the rights of all citizens. There's a balancing act that takes place. Government is not always going to get it right, and neither are we as individuals for that matter. But that's the goal. We want to get it right as often as possible, and when we get it wrong, we want to fix that, right? Now, I want you to remember something about free speech, because we're having a lot of debate now, and with our massive culture war, we're having yet another moral panic. This is not the first, it won't be the last, but we are in the midst of a moral panic. And the moral panic is happening on both sides of the ideological spectrum, the extreme right and the extreme left. And I want to have you take a look at this quote from George Washington. If freedom of speech is taken away, then dumb and silent we may be led like sheep to the slaughter. Okay. One of the first things to go is free speech. We want to silence those we disagree with. Okay. And that's a problem. Okay. That's a problem. So we're going to talk about that too. So here's some fundamental distinctions, right? Civil liberties are fundamental natural rights. Civil rights are about equal rights for persons, all people, regardless of characteristics such as race, gender, or religion, right? Civil liberties are based in the Constitution, predominantly the Bill of Rights, but in other places as well. Civil rights are about freedom to live one's life and engage in the political process without discrimination. With civil liberties, some rights are identified in the Constitution proper, but like I said, most of them are in the Bill of Rights. Civil rights involve discrimination by others against one's rights, okay? One of the fundamental things I want you to keep in mind is the idea that civil liberties are about natural rights. Civil rights are about government action. So speech is a natural right. Education is not a natural right. But because government has decided to provide this service, all folks have a civil right to education in this country. Now, you don't have a civil liberty. That's not a natural right, but you do have a civil right to education because government has chosen to provide education. And because it's chosen to do that, it must provide that equally to all people. Okay? So, all right, the Bill of Rights. We've talked about this before, but it bears review, right? The Bill of Rights are the first 10 amendments. It's not the same thing as the Constitution. They're a part of the Constitution of the first 10 amendments, the first 10 changes to the Constitution. This bill, the Bill of Rights, provides rights for political, religious, or racial minorities against the majority. I want people to understand that we are a representative democracy. We are not a pure or direct democracy. In a direct democracy, the majority rules all the time. All the time. Okay? We're a constitutional republic. I prefer that term personally. Okay? So, and again, I must have this disclaimer, we don't always get it right. Matter of fact, in many cases in our history, we've gotten it wrong. But it's built in to a constitutional republic that rights of the minority are protected. Now, it's incumbent upon the people serving in government to actually fulfill that mandate, to actually fulfill that. But it is built in. In a pure democracy or direct democracy, no, it's not built in. It's not there. It doesn't exist. Tyranny of the majority is SOP, standard operating procedure. Okay. So, and as I've said, tyranny of the majority is something we've talked about when we covered Federalist 10. Madison talked about that there at length. And we're going to be talking about that more during this series of video lessons. So, Bill of Rights protected the people from the national government at our outset, at the start of the country. They did not actually protect people from state governments. The Bill of Rights didn't apply to state governments. It only applied to the national government until in 1868, we get the 14th Amendment, where something called incorporation theory or selective incorporation or the incorporation doctrine. So I want you to pause the video or rewind it and write all three of those down, okay, because you could hear them referred to any of those ways. Incorporation theory, selective incorporation, or incorporation doctrine, right? So it's there. It's right there, AKA, and I include that there. This, in 1868, we started applying these protections in the Bill of Rights to state governments as well. But it's important to note that wasn't originally the plan. So, restricted speech versus freedom of speech, right? Let's take a look at this. So, freedom of speech, I'm going to start on the left here. That's the heart of our government. That's the heart of everything. If you don't have freedom of expression, you don't have anything. If the government can punish you for expressing yourself, we're done. There is no freedom. There's no democracy. There's no representative democracy. There's no constitutional republic, whatever phrase you want to use to describe our government. No, it doesn't happen if you don't have freedom of speech, if you don't have freedom of expression. So this is about permitting citizens to form opinions and express those opinions to others. All right, it helps people participate in government. It helps to check inefficient or corrupt government. All right, it directs speech towards debate and discussion instead of fighting and violence. Okay, so when people aren't free to express what they want to express, even if we hate it, it will go elsewhere. It will go towards fighting and violence. And let that hang there a minute. You want to silence people, that's fine. You can silence people, but just because you've successfully silenced them doesn't mean those ideas are gone. They'll just go somewhere else. And if they're not being vocal about it, they're going to go somewhere you can't track. And you have no idea the pervasiveness of those thoughts that are being expressed. Freedom of speech and freedom of expression also promotes stability in society because people know that they're not going to get thrown in the gulag. They're not going to get thrown in jail for expressing an opinion. Now, there are forms of restricted speech. Freedom of speech is not absolute. So, a couple of types here: seditious speech, pornography, campus speech, and hate speech. Okay, these are forms of restricted speech. Now, in times of war, the courts have granted government pretty wide latitude in regulating some speech, speaking out against war efforts and actions by the government during times of war, directing overthrow of the government, for example. Those things are not generally protected. Pornography. Pornography. This is difficult to define. One famous justice said, I can't give you a definition, but I know it when I see it. We're going to explore this also. There are certain forms of pornography that child pornography is illegal. This is absolutely illegal in any circumstance. It is not legal. It is not protected at all in any way, manner, shape, or form. Okay? People are caught with it, they go to prison. It is that simple. Campus speech is protected, but schools, and this involves college campuses as well as K through 12, but schools can regulate to maintain public safety and to preserve the learning environment. So that there is some justification for various campuses, again, at any level of education, restricting certain kinds of speech to achieve those twin goals. Hate speech is protected, but you cannot incite illegal activity. So if I'm at which I would never be, just full disclosure, would never be there. But let's say I was at some kind of hate rally and I direct people, or someone directs people to kill a certain group of people. So go out and kill them. And then they go out and kill them. That's not protected speech. You explicitly said, go kill these people. They went and killed those people. You're all going down for murder and conspiracy to commit murder, right? So expressly saying go and attack and go and do these bad things, that is not protected speech. But if you're not directly instructing someone to act explicitly, then that speech is protected as much as we may hate it. And we'll talk more about these issues in class. So, no prior restraint. This idea that prior restraint is effectively the government stepping in and saying, you can't publish that because it's bad or it's going to cause a problem. Generally speaking, prior restraint is not going to happen. The courts are not going to support it. There are very limited circumstances where they might. A key, I'll get to those in a second, but examples of where the government tried to do it and failed. The Pentagon Papers case, where the court ruled in favor of the papers, the newspapers, the media, despite the government claims of national security. There was no imminent threat. It simply would make the government look bad and result in the government being held to the standard that they should be held to. They were doing bad things, they were doing illegal things, and they were doing it in the name of the American public and not telling us about it and actively trying to hide it. So the Supreme Court said, no, can't do it. Tinker v. Des Moines School District, students were protesting the Vietnam War, and this is an example of symbolic speech. They wore black armbands around their arms, black armbands. So they weren't actually stating or writing anything. They just wore black armbands. That's it. That's all they did. And they were suspended. The school district tried to stop them from doing that. The Supreme Court ruled in their favor and said, hey, this is symbolic speech, and it's protected, and it's not disrupting the learning environment. You just don't like it. And that's not a good enough reason. So free speech was upheld. So as I just said, Tinker v. Des Moines is a example of protection of symbolic speech. There's protection of commercial speech. It's legal. It can be regulated by government to an extent, but again, and this is something we need to explore too in the age of social media, freedom of expression and speech is guaranteed from government. It's protection from government regulating your speech, but there's less. It's a little fuzzy. It's a little murky on how much the government can step in to deal with private companies or private individuals restricting said speech. So that's a bit more complex. There are permitted restrictions on expression if there's this clear and present danger principle. Laws cannot punish speech unless there was a clear and present danger of harmful actions resulting. So, quote unquote, yelling fire in a crowded theater, where there's no fire. You're just trying to be funny, and like there's a stampede and a bunch of people get hurt because they're all trying to get out of the movie theater. That's not protected. There's also this idea of the grave and probable danger rule. Government does have a right to interfere if the results of such speech would be so dangerous that action is warranted to prevent danger. So there's a clear and present danger rule and the grave and probable danger rule. We'll explore these ideas more in class. So the Warren Court was very friendly to freedom of expression, very friendly. They said schools must allow free speech. Students can't disrupt the school. So you can't, for example, like stop classes from going on. You can't blockade the hallway to prevent people from getting to their classes, but you can speak your mind. Political speech is an exception. Um, uh, but you have to be careful over how disruptive you become. If you're going to really cause massive, massive problems, the school can step in and stop you. The Berger and Rehnquist courts were a little more conservative on this issue and not exactly as enthusiastic as the Warren Court was. And Berger and Rehnquist came after. They can restrict student speech for educational purposes if necessary. They can restrict speech or clothing that is lewd or vulgar, or that promotes sex, drugs, or violence. Okay. They can censor student publications, but web pages created off campus are protected unless they urge illegal action or make terrorist threats. So when people are like, why can't the schools do anything about social media? Those are websites and things that are happening outside of school. And the school has no authority and no ability to deal with that. None whatsoever, unless this activity continues into the school environment. Then there's some leeway there, but no, school has no method of regulating the kinds of bullying and the kinds of awfulness that are happening in social media outside of school hours and off of school grounds. So, demonstrations, right? Protests, fundamental. I like to talk about the P's. The P's in the First Amendment. You have protest, you have petition, you have press. Okay, so those P's. We're talking about protests. So individuals are allowed to use public places for protest, sidewalks, parks, theaters, right? They cannot disrupt activities. If you're blocking traffic, you're doing something that's illegal. That's not protected. You're going to get arrested. And if you're all about civil disobedience and getting arrested, that's fine. But they're not violating your rights by arresting you if you're blocking a highway. I'm not saying, whatever, but that's not protected. That's not a public forum. Okay, you can't block traffic and expect that is protected. It's not. You'll be arrested and thrown in jail, and that's that. Private property is excluded. You require the owner's permission. So if you want to protest a private company and they tell you no, well, sorry, they can arrest you, and that's it. You'll be charged with trespassing. Okay. Neighborhood marches are okay, but cannot focus on a particular house. So you can march through a neighborhood, but if you're stopping at a house and causing problems, that's not protected. Okay. That's not you exercising free speech. That's terrorizing the occupants of the house. And you may feel they deserve it. You may feel that with everything they've done to people, they deserve it. Yeah, no. Even if they do deserve it, you can't do it. That's not protected. You stop at a house and you terrorize the occupants, that is not protected speech. Okay? Government can require a permit. They can establish restrictions to avoid disruptions, but they cannot censor what you say. They cannot censor, but they can require the first two. Okay? So freedom of speech, I've already looked. So let's take a look at this political cartoon. I've already looked. I tell you, there's not a thing in here that excludes scum. And that's the Supreme Court. They're looking at the First Amendment, and down here are neo-Nazis and white supremacist folks. So I'll leave that to you to take a look at the cartoon. I look forward to your thoughts about this in class. And with that ends part one. Before I leave, I want you to pay attention to this quote from Salman Rushdie, pretty famous author of Iranian descent, who had to flee Iran because there was a fatwa, there was a death order out for him. And he said, the moment that you declare a set of ideas to be immune from criticism, satire, derision, or contempt, freedom of thought becomes impossible. I leave you with that. I hope you learned what you needed to, and I will see you next time.